Welcome to Earth, a love story. I'm your host, Robin Lassiter. This is a solo episode where I'm going to talk about the connection between UFOs and the goddess. I've been thinking about this episode for a long time, and about a week ago, it just all poured through. And I wrote, and now it just wants to come through my body. Get ready. Here we go. Hold on to your butts. The goddess, the divine feminine, the lady, some call her. The goddess has 1,000 faces, and I call her life herself. She is the great cosmic mother, the mother of everything and everyone, and she is Mother Earth, connected to the dark, pulsing soil, and she is the uncried cry, the great round Ereshkigal down in the underworld, holding our personal and collective shadows down in the mud and the blood, and she is the cherishing mother, and the dark feminine and the devouring feminine, and she is spider woman, snake woman, wolf mother, mother bear, and she is the rose and the thorn. And she is Kali and Lakshmi and Shakti and the triple goddess Morrigan and the Virgin of Guadalupe and the Black Madonna, and she is Abigail and Deborah of the bees and Saraswati, and I could go on forever because she goes on forever. She wears human skulls around her neck, and she arrives in blinding light, spilling out unconditional love, and showers of rose petals fall in her presence, and she rises up through the soles of my feet and pushes my own darkness and uncried cries to the surface. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again, the ETs have me by the hair, and the goddess, well, she has me by the balls. The goddess has 1,000 faces, and like many women and some men in my age group, I first encountered her in the external world while reading The Mists of Avalon by Marion Zimmer Bradley in my early 20s. She was in Morgaine's, longing for Lancelot to just fucking surrender to life already, and she was in the apple orchard in Avalon, and she was in The Lady of the Lake, and at the end, spoiler, she was veiled in the Blessed Marian statue tucked back in the cloisters of Glastonbury. She was in the weaving and the spell casting and the keeping of the rites with Morgaine's husband's son, and she was in the grief where the old groves were cut down and the rites were all but lost. For thousands of years and for all of our current age here in the West, the goddess has been hidden in the dark. She is re-emerging now, and we barely have the language to know what to do with her. Oh, we do with her, though. We frack and extract and turn her into an idea that fits into our constructs and culture. And we turn her into an archetype, and we wear goddess dresses on the beach. No shade to goddess dresses on the beach. And at our core, we remain terrified of her. She is sex and devouring and rage and the heart of compassion, and we've shoved so much of her down into the underworld that we can barely look at her. We approach her from the side with eyes cast down and try not to look directly at her terrible glory, and eventually we can't help ourselves and we steal a glimpse, and she turns us to stone, or she slaughters us and hangs us on a meat hook on her wall while she wails and yells, and we can't tell if it's agony or ecstasy. We can't tell if she's dying or giving birth. She comes to us soft in the morning sometimes, with the coolest of hands on our fevered brows as we open our eyes and see the golden light coming in through dappled leaves, and she comes when we collapse into her lap, when we need the safest of places to be. She is life herself. She is the animate force of it all. She is the stinging of tears in my eyes while I grieve for another potentiality lost, another timeline jumped, crossed, another death and birth, and grief is the only answer to it all. If I could sum up the goddess, which, hear me, I cannot, she would be death and birth and joy and grief. She is the ever-emerging, ever-collapsing vital heart of every shimmering atom and quark in existence, and she is beyond words. She just is. She moves through us and writhes and contorts us, and she is the desire in me that I cannot contain. She seems to come from deep within, down and in, and where I resist her, Where I stifle her, where I block her, my muscles and nerves and blood and bones grow in around themselves and contract. I pinch my mouth, and my right shoulder is always a little higher and also always slightly curled toward my left hip so that I'm subtly bracing against an impact that has come and may come again. And where I let her flow, where she has free rein to move and shape me and go, I feel simply alive. The goddess is the heartbeat at the center of the universe, calling us home in every instant. Birth, death, birth, death, birth, death, birth, death, like the heartbeat of life and grief, heartbreak, the only true response to her. She wants our hearts. She wants our hearts to break open and never be able to come back together again. She wants her wild desire and soft, cool compassion to move through us, and there really is no way to speak of her any more than pointing at the moon is the moon. The goddess has 1,000 faces, and I could go on and on about her and the ways she came to me, and I will talk about that a bit more. But first, what does all of this have to do with UFOs, for God's sake? And actually, while I'm pausing to catch my breath, I will say this one time. This episode is not about men and women. It's not anti-masculine, it's just about the feminine. We all have her inside of us, and we all have the masculine too, and it's not about better or worse, and there's toxicity expressed through both lenses because of what we've repressed, so don't get it twisted. This is not a battle of the sexes, it's about the life force that is at the heart of the divine friction between those two energies. And I, for one, don't think we need a matriarchy or a patriarchy. I think we need something new, where instead of two, we have one, a secret third option that brings us home. And I don't think we know what that is yet. I don't think we can understand it yet. I think we're creating it together, and it's messy and weird and confusing, and we have a ways to go. And since it's the feminine energy that's been in the underworld for these many centuries, she will be who I am centering for the foreseeable. Okay, UFOs. When I was in my 20s and working at an import shop on the corner of Main and Commercial in my little hometown, I found a hand-painted wine bottle, a Mexican votive painting depicting a saucer-shaped UFO and the Virgin of Guadalupe, created as an offering to the Virgin as a thank you for saving the artist from the UFO. I bought it immediately in a state of unease and fascination and kept it for 2 days before taking it back, because every time I walked past, I felt an energy emitting from it and felt terrified and dizzy, and I hadn't even begun to approach the realities of the mystery. Most recently, I think we all know about Chris Bledsoe and his encounter with the lady. There couldn't be a more potent example of the overlap of the contemporary iteration of the phenomenon and ETs and UFOs than his account of her. And also, for some reason, the government is super interested in all of that. And I'll leave that alone, and you can read his book, UFO of God, and draw your own conclusions. For me, she arrived right in the middle of my reactivation around UFOs and ETs that happened from 2020 to 2023. While I was coming to terms with the absurdity of the phenomenon and how it was appearing and guiding my life, she arrived. She arrived as the vessel that held me as I died and didn't die with the first processed grief of my life. I'd had lots of reasons to grieve before, but this time I chose. I went down and in and was slaughtered and shattered, and grief was a portal and a doorway and a death and a gateway and eventually a great relief. She came to me in dreams and did not suffer my foolishness. She held me close and pushed me to my edges and placed me in the fire to dance in the flames until everything that couldn't come along was burned away. And it was during that time that I decided to emigrate, to devote myself to her, to life herself, specifically the her that is the earth energy coming up through the soles of my feet. I made promises and vows, and they remain my deepest, most feral, potent, and raw devotion. The dark goddess, calling me forever down and in and teaching me to die to come alive. And every time I think I have it, a new face is revealed and I surrender, and around we go and more is burned away, and I forget and remember and forget. And sometimes I think she's supposed to remain in the shadows. I don't know. The goddess has 1,000 faces, and I was shocked when she arrived along with ETs and UFOs. She is calling us to face our denial of death and grief, sex and rage, the feminine, calling us to remember our humanity and showing us how out of sync we've been with the natural rhythms of this place. I have a theory that if we all developed enough capacity to fully feel the pain of the earth and her creatures, the pain of slaughtered children by a few men in power, the pain of how disconnected we've become from her and each other, if we were ever able to fully feel all of that, the grief of that, the terrible and holy heartbreak of that, and learn to accept the death and birth and death and birth and grief and joy and grief and joy that seems to be the ecstatic symphony held in the center of every cell in creation, a nuclear energy driving the world. If we were ever able to feel and be with all of that, we'd all put down our meaningless shit and come together, and no one would ever go hungry or cold, and we'd spend our lives just loving each other home. And there's another play that's happening around UFOs, Nuts and Bolts it's called, and it's about crash retrievals and exotic materials. And maybe if aerospace and defense companies like Lockheed and Boeing and Raytheon can harness the ET tech, they can get us off this dying planet and we can go to Mars, which I'm pretty sure we blew up and killed eons ago, and we can inhabit that planet before we even remember how to live on ours. And that, my friends, is why we need the goddess. Maybe we do explore space, and maybe we take our place as a galactic race, but if we do that thinking we can outrun death and grief, then we're already dead, and for what? A working class in a bubble on a dead world, while the mega rich stay here and eat real meat, and the working class eat Soylent Green. Okay, I digress. The goddess has 1,000 faces, and I met her in 2017 when I lived on the big island of Hawaii and went to see the new land that was forming near Kalapana, and I sat on the black, solid, frozen, rippled lava and watched her, the ultimate creatrix, making new land. There are no words. Just pure energy, pure creation and destruction all rolled into one, and I could feel in my bones that I didn't really belong there on that new land that belonged to the native Hawaiians, but I felt that I belonged to her, and she was not containable or explainable. No words, just pure energy. And a week or so ago, I had a dream that I was riding my childhood horse, Glory, down the road a few miles from my home. There was a little homestead on the right, and there was a grass fire spreading fast, and I galloped over to try to help, and the fire was jumping from grass to brush to trees and approaching the house, and I was desperately looking for a shovel to try to dig a containment line. It was night, and my horse was nervous but stayed with me, and I couldn't find a shovel, and the fire spread, and I had no power there. And that's how it feels sometimes, silly, helpless me trying to put a boundary around the spreading desire, life herself consuming and transmuting everything, and me trying to contain her. And no. The goddess has 1,000 faces, and I met her again in a holy circle of 10. I found myself in a circle of women, and we were chanting and dancing, drumming and sobbing, laughing and touching. I found myself entranced, and when I woke from the trance, from the drumming and the dance, I was panting on my knees, and there was a woman to my left and my right, and arms around shoulders wove us tight. Women, glassy-eyed and so alive, and the goddess was in the room, in the molecules of air between us and in our shared breath and sweat. On my knees in this circle, the wild cries and dances now complete, and it was still, quiet. All bright eyes and parted lips, and the thin sheen of sweat and chests and breath rising and falling in unison, and the air was thick with her. A mist hung among us, and we breathed it in through our skin, alive, caught in the mystery of her and the trance we'd been in. Francis Weller says that there are 5 gateways of grief. One of them is the thing I expected and did not receive. And my skin grieves for the village I did not receive. My heart longs for the trance that comes with ritual and drumming and dance, and my eyes are hungry for unmasked faces. My body longs for people and spaces and places to contain my unfettered grief and my ecstasy. And I know in my bones that it's possible, because the goddess has revealed herself to me in these fleeting moments, and in them something in me is broken open, and I long to be held in the spell of her. There is no disclosure bigger than her, no disclosure bigger than death. Death and birth, and learning to bear the end and the beginning and the end again, and learning to bear the bigness of the grief of it all, and finding joy unexpectedly. On the other side, learning to bear the fullness of life, learning to let it move through us, writhing and contorting us, learning to bear the truth that the goddess has 1,000 faces, and she is me and you and the mud and the blood and fecund soil and the clean blue sky above. There is something beyond pathology, something beyond sterility and control and psychology, something beyond the narratives that create the world. It is her, and she is in our bones. And this episode is a weird, lilting half poem because of her. This episode has no answers, no neat bows wrapping up our questions and fears and hopes. And if you still don't know why the goddess is a needed component in the conversation around UFOs, I don't know. And I actually don't care. Because the linear, logical, steady, contained, predictable, consistent rhetoric, the masculine, doesn't live here in me when I open the door to her. I so value the people who are bridging the scientific and the spiritual, the mystical with an exploration of consciousness through that logical, linear lens. It is a bridge that is vital to build. It's a way to bring an end to rational materialism, but it is not my way, not today. I am in service to her, and sometimes she comes in dreams, and sometimes in the tears that sting my eyes, and sometimes in a cool hand on my forehead, in the golden morning light, and sometimes in the way I dance, and sometimes in the way that longing fills up every cell of my body, and all I can do is express that feeling through guttural cries. She comes to me in art and visions and in terror and sex, racking my body with a force that is not me, and even I can't tell if it's agony or ecstasy, if I'm dying or giving birth. The goddess has 1,000 faces, and I am in devotion to her, and God help me. And there's so much more to say about all of this, but that's a start. I have many more episodes percolating. I'm currently on fire for this work, which means I think about it intensely all the time, and then a moment arrives when it's all pouring through, and I get as much of it down and out as I can, so stay tuned. Thank you so much to Morgan Jinks for her beautiful soundscapes. If you're interested in supporting my work, please consider joining my Patreon, where I share shorter form content sporadically and have been giving my patrons gifts and discounts lately, which has been really pleasurable. I'm thinking of sharing a dating app bio as shadow work post soon, which is guaranteed to be cringy as fuck. And maybe I'll share that with the world, who knows. Also, my audiobook is coming soon. I can't wait for that. And I am opening a new cohort in the fall. You can join that waiting list if you'd like. I'll put the link in the show notes. We already have a nice group of folks there. And as ever, if you're interested in working with me in a Meet the Guides session, a past life regression, or to book a one-on-one coaching session with me, please visit honeyheart.org.